Welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to do our case study for our lecture looking at the waves of terrorism. And so for the case study, I thought it would be good to focus more on the fourth wave of terrorism, which we started to talk about, the religious wave of terrorism that really seems to have taken off, according to David Rappaport's research, since the 1980s. And I thought I'd use a case that perhaps maybe some of you aren't as familiar with and start to look at a group called Shinrikyo, or as they've been relabeled, Aleph. This is a terrorist organization that was founded in 1984 by a man named Shoko Asahara. And Shoko Asahara started out as a individual who was interested in various faiths and gradually radicalized and started to, in a lot of ways, create his own form of religion and created a religion that was essentially a mixture of Buddhism, Hindu, and brought in elements of Christianity. He even at times referred to himself as Jesus Christ. And initially, there wasn't as much of an element or outward appearance of what would ultimately become a violent terrorist organization, was just more of a small religious movement that really took off and actually even got recognized as a religious group by the local government in Japan, in Tokyo, in the late 1980s, but pretty quickly escalated and radicalized into a very violent terrorist organization. And this really fits in with our fourth wave of terrorism, as a lot of the elements that explain their radicalization, their focus on carrying out violence, was the belief that through the use of violence, through the use of their terrorist actions, they could bring about a end of the world. They had an apocalyptic view of the world, and that their organization, their true believers, and their leader, Shoko Asahara, could ultimately bring in this apocalyptic end of the world where they, as the true followers, actually, Shinrikyo actually translate roughly to the idea of what we call supreme truth, is how it roughly translates into English. They thought they could bring about end of the world. They essentially would ascend to a type of paradise that they would actually get to inherit and have it because they were the true believers in the faith, and they were the true believers in their leader, Shoko Asahara. And Shoko Asahara began to advocate more and more for violent attacks to be carried out to bring about this ultimate end times, to bring about the end of the world. And the peak of their violence and the peak of their notoriety really comes about in 1995. And they ended up carrying out a large-scale terrorist attack on 3 subway lines, 5 coordinated attacks on March 20th, 1995. And what they did was they ended up manufacturing and acquiring a large amount of sarin nerve gas. And I don't know if any of you have seen the depiction of nerve gas in movies or anywhere online, but it's a horrific, horrific way to actually die. These gases essentially end up choking you. Some of them have the capacity to melt certain aspects of your insides. They completely destroy a human being, whether they suffocate to death, whether they burn their insides. They are a horrific, horrific weapon that that really, really should never be used in any circumstances. And these terrorist organizations were able to manufacture, or this terrorist organization, Shinrikyo, was able to manufacture and acquire a good amount of sarin nerve gas. And their attacks, luckily, I mean, if we think about the scale of it, again, it killed 12 people, injured more than 1,000, but could have been even worse. Now, of course, this is horrific, but the scale and the use of nerve gas could have been exponentially greater. But luckily, they were able to mitigate the damage, although they were still able to really shock the Japanese government, shock the world with their attacks and usage of chemical weapons in a terrorist attack was quite shocking and really shook the foundation of in the confidence in the Japanese government for a while, and really created a concern about this organization worldwide. And they actually still do exist. They are labeled as a terrorist organization around the world, the United States, a lot of European countries, Russia, China. They even have there are even concerns about their capacity to still operate. They have continued to exist as an organization even after their 1995 subway attack. And pretty quickly after the subway attack, the Japanese government was actually able to apprehend and arrest Asahara, and he actually was executed in 2018. And this actually led to a fresh round of terrorist attacks by those still loyal and supportive of him. On New Year's Day, January 2019, a individual follower of Shinrikyo, of Asahara, actually managed to kill a number of people in Tokyo in a car attack, driving through a crowded pedestrian area, pledging his allegiance to Asahara, trying to get revenge for the Japanese government executing him for his horrific crimes in organizing this Tokyo subway attack. And so even after the arrest of Asahara, this group has continued to function, and that we see this as a factor in the reason why a lot of these groups can even continue to exist even after their leaders are potentially arrested or executed, is the religious fervor oftentimes doesn't die down even with the loss of a particular leader. It can in certain instances, but these diehard believers in this religiously motivated terrorism representative of this fourth wave, it's beyond political ends, and it really cultivates an extremely dogmatic following, a following that isn't likely to disband easily, especially if we think about the fact that these groups really believe that they are serving a higher purpose, and oftentimes want to bring about an end time, want to bring about an apocalypse to try to achieve their ultimate objectives. And this goes even beyond what we think of usually as normal political ends. And of course, it's not saying that the terrorist attacks that are committed by groups that are purely political aren't horrific, but it's saying that the level of devotion that certain scholars have argued is that it's even greater for these particular groups, like Shinrikyo, other groups like ISIS, groups like the Army of God, who, as I talked about in the last class, blow up abortion clinics. These groups move beyond even just what we think of normal political goals and really create concerns about the capacity and how effectively we can ultimately de-radicalize, counter these groups without potentially having to completely destroy them for fear that they aren't willing to engage in any sort of compromise, walk back their highly dogmatic religious beliefs that they use to justify their extreme killings. So just wanted to use this Shinrikyo as an example, look at the Tokyo terrorist attack to really highlight sort of this religious fourth wave of terrorism that we've seen over the last 30 years, 40 years or so, to really sort of highlight some of these various elements that seem to exist across various terrorist groups that fit in with this religious wave of terrorism. So to finish up, give you your third discussion question. Your third discussion question is, why do you think someone becomes an apocalyptic religious leader like Shoko Asahara? Again, question number 3, why do you think someone becomes an apocalyptic religious leader like Shoko Asahara? All right, thanks everybody for listening. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.